Mr. Eliasson, welcome to our program. It's a real honor to have you on this special anniversary of the UN. For you, as East River was your home basically for your whole career in a way there. How was it for you to see these empty corridors, this once in the history, 75 years after the Second World War, empty corridors at East River and presidents and statesmen speaking virtually?
It was a very strange feeling. I hope it was not symbolic of the lack of dialogue that we see in the world today and the lack of trust. But it was a rather artificial experience, even if the speeches, some of them were very good. It still was not an impression of diplomatic life and communication and corridor conversations and the beginning of mediation work and so forth, as usually is the case. So it was a unique, in a rather negative way, experience. But I hope that we will come back to normal meetings and dialogue in the future.
You said it was a negative sentiment in the way. We heard strong messages from the Secretary General. We know what, pandemic made to the world, what made us think about, but he emphasized that we should not basically enter into a situation of possible new Cold War with two biggest economies, meaning of course China and the US, split the globe in the fracture, each with its own rules of trade and finance, with its internet and artificial intelligence capacities. We know the President Xi Jinping will be there forever, for life. President Trump is facing his re-election possible in 1 month. So how do you see the situation evolving as this multilateralism being fractured with this pandemic, or maybe not?
I think we are in a serious situation and we are facing a huge challenge to come back to the belief in multilateral cooperation. And it seems like we have a long way to go because there is a lack of trust, not least between the United States and China, and it seems to be growing. And we have also seen clear signs of leaving international agreements in favor of so-called national solutions. This goes, unfortunately, very much for the very important democracy of the United States, who has left several areas of cooperation. And the latest, even connected to the pandemic we are suffering right now, when the US left the WHO, the World Health Organization. So we are, in my view, in a serious situation. We have to take it very seriously. We have an enormous agenda in front of us, not only the COVID-19, but also the climate change issues and the different conflicts which are giving us an enormous pain, particularly people who are affected by the war, but also leading to huge huge movements of refugees and migrants, as we have seen in Europe and elsewhere. So we have to take this situation very seriously. I'm usually calling myself an optimist, but I am definitely now in the category of a very worried optimist.
Talking about worries of today, there was a call at the beginning of the pandemic of the Secretary General to stop all the world conflicts because pandemic show us, we have some other enemies, which he called the virus. But it's not so. We've seen this weekend again conflict rising in Nagorno-Karabakh, for example, Syria, all these hot spots that we have of conflicts are still going on. And this time you spent your career in conflict resolution. After the career in UN, you're now at the head of Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Military industry is strong. We see new nuclearization of the world. Do you think that the world understands that the concept of security is something more to the military might and what we are seeing now?
Well, we have to face up to the reality that the problems in the world that affect the people, and remember the first 3 words of the UN Charter is we the peoples, it's not we the governments. People are suffering tremendously, and we need very much now to take security seriously. On your first point, I think it is very, very upsetting that the Security Council took 3 months to come to a resolution on this very safe and sound idea of ending conflicts while the COVID-19 was hitting us so hard. That is a sign of, first of all, the lacking trust between the major powers, in this case, US and China. But it is also a sign that we don't take seriously the fact that the Security Council should really be a negotiation body and forcing itself to solutions. The veto power has been like a wet blanket lying over international conflict resolution. And during my 5 years as Deputy Secretary General, my biggest pain, my biggest frustration was that we could not come to a solution on this crisis and the war in Syria, mainly because the parties on the ground were, of course, very, very much in different positions, and in the case of opposition, very splintered, but also the fact that it became a regional conflict. Iran's and Saudi Arabia's interests were clashing in Syria. But lastly, there was a strong difference of opinion on the way forward in the Security Council between the United States and Russia. And this meant that very good, great negotiators like Kofi Annan, Lakhdar Brahimi, Staffan de Mistura failed to really force the parties to the negotiation table to seriously discuss ending the war. So yes, we need to, first of all, take the security responsibility seriously, or rather the P5 particularly, but we also need to see security in a broader context, as you indicated. It is time for us to realize that security is also climate security. Security is pandemic security. Security is women's situation, children's situation. We need to take a much more down-to-earth human approach to security. And this is very necessary for the Security Council to do as soon as possible. I was president of the General Assembly, and I remember that we had the formula no peace without development, and no development without peace, and neither peace nor development without respect to human rights. We have to broaden the understanding of security.
On your point, we saw before the UN General Assembly this year the report of the Gates Foundation. It basically said that in 25 days the world went 25 days in terms of sustainable development goals, which you also spent your career strongly advocating for. So does the world understand basically that with these pandemics and what we face as a humanity, which you've mentioned, climate change, migrations in this broader sense, food security, water supply security, still gender inequality as the core of socioeconomic consequences for this world, is something to tackle, or we will die, if I'm too extreme saying that?
Oh, you're absolutely right. We have to broaden the agenda, and we have to show that we take seriously the 3 words of the Charter, we the peoples. If we don't adopt this human approach to security, then we will lose faith in international cooperation. And since the multilateral system is under strain and stress, not least with the COVID-19 making nations look inward rather than outward, we take a huge risk of losing one of the most important instruments that we have since the end of the Second World War, namely the structure of an international organization which has a mandate both for peace and security, development and human rights. So much is at stake now. We have to take the human approach, because this lack of trust in institutions that we see both nationally and internationally is very dangerous. It has led to a polarization which is going further and further practically every day, both in Europe and not least in the United States.
We saw technology playing a huge factor in this polarization of the world. In a way, it should have helped us as a humanity to progress in a way of medicine, of helping people around the world. But we also see this social influence from social media, polarizing people, affecting the processes in the world. We saw now, you know, during the pandemics, this anti-public health movement, if I can call him like that. So how do you see the role of technology in this future that is not so optimistic from your eyes?
Well, when I was part of the negotiations on the global goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, I felt very much that we needed to take this broader approach. And I would have hoped that the goals would be sort of the standard for us to follow. Now we have lost a lot of territory. We have turned into the nationalistic direction rather than international direction. And I would say that the social media, the internet revolution has really showed two faces. One, of course, realizing that we are all together in the world, but the other one, that we have a public debate, both internationally and nationally, which has made the dialogue more difficult, where we have used hatred and despising of each other and not accepting the normal dialogue. So I'm of two minds of this revolution on the internet and social media. It's a great catalyst for knowledge, of course, for a lot of people, and a great liberator in that way. But it is also an instrument that has exacerbated the situation and made normal, in my view, diplomatic dialogue and quiet contacts more difficult.
You've mentioned several times these first words of UN Charter, we the peoples, and as I've read, you always carry basically the Charter with you wherever you go. Also, it's interesting.
I have it here in front of me.
That's very interesting because, you know, we the peoples are always going on to elections and electing some people to rule in our name, so to govern our societies in our name in a way. You also have one very important global leadership prize named after you. So from your really vast experience in this world that we live in today, what kind of leadership should we need for these challenging times? Because we already mentioned US and China. We know what regional problems EU as such has, and as one region in the world. We know Africa's population is growing. We see what's happening in Latin America, Asia. So what kind of global leadership or global governance should be needed in this world to carry out what you've been talking about?
Well, I have turned into a very strong pro-European during the last few years. I think even if we have the problems in Europe of Brexit and migration, lack of solutions for migration of refugees, and we even have some hesitation in some countries about the road forward on democracy, still, the European project is an enormous promise. And we who now have to fight hard for the health and strength of democracy, I think we should really take seriously that Europe must take more of a global responsibility and accept more of a global role, particularly representing democracy, not least. Then I think, of course, we need leadership. We need political leadership, which is both visionary and practical. We need to have leadership which combines a passion for international cooperation and even solidarity, I hope I can mention, but also that could make people realize that this international cooperation is also a national interest. We have created an artificial difference between the national and international. In today's world, climate, migration, trade, and everything, the good international solution is also in the national interest. And that is the kind of leadership that I would hope would come now. And that's why I felt so bad that we couldn't have a lively and strong exchange also on the personal level in New York when the UN was meeting in this critical stage. So we have to mobilize in different ways, a way of thinking which combines taking care of our nations and at the same time being part of an international community.
And just for the end, is this future a future of women leaders? We saw some strong names coming out of this crisis and before, from politics to climate change movement.
Oh yes, I'm extremely impressed by the growing role of women, and I think now historically is the most important time for the full empowerment and liberation of women. It has never really happened, but it's coming now. When I was a UN ambassador, where there were 10 UN ambassadors, women ambassadors, now I think there are 35 or 40. When I was in the UN recently, I met presidents and I met prime ministers, and I saw them from all over the world, Africa, Asia, Latin America, while in some other countries we still haven't reached that position, but it's coming. And I think now in the COVID crisis, what the Prime Minister of New Zealand is showing, and the Nordic Prime Ministers are showing, and Merkel, of course, Angela Merkel, that is a great example for young people to see, and not least girls, that the future is theirs. But I also believe that that future should be shared by men. I worked for Prime Minister Olof Palme once upon a time, and he received the draft of a speech which called for the emancipation of women. And he said, "You have not understood the title. You must change that. It is the emancipation of man." Both men and women have an interest in seeing that. And the leadership shown by many women recently is just wonderful to see.
Mr. Eliasson, thank you so much for your time talking to us. We'll, of course, follow out your work at Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, and we will all see where this world of we the peoples will carry us at the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.